Oh, hi there. This is MP Fitzgerald, author of A Happy Bureaucracy, and I'm pretending to play the jazz piano. You know, advertisements were invented by the devil to make Ayn Rand happy, and no one wants to make Ayn Rand happy. But audio production is expensive, so to keep commercials off this podcast, I've got all 3 ebooks in the Happy Bureaucracy series rolled into one for the price of a single book, which honestly is the best way to support this podcast. Just check the description for a link and tell your friends about the crazy shit you have been listening to have less friends. Thanks. And now for something completely different.
A Happy Bureaucracy by M.P. Fitzgerald. Narrated by Gary Bennett. Author's note: strewn between drug use, groin malice, and cursing on a level tantamount to sacrilege are gratuitous mentions of bureaucracy. These bureaucratic references may not be for the weak of heart. Chapter 19. The cold black and white checkered tiles of the bunker were spotless and clean. The concrete walls were without dust or stain. This was a colossal problem. As Arthur and Rabia made their way down to the office of Henry S. Boyd, who was now a full commissioner, there was not a single flaw that Arthur could spot on the walls or floor. It had not just been cleaned methodically, but hand-scrubbed to the molecule. It was almost beautiful, if it did not portend doom for the one cleaning. Whoever had done this job, if they kept it up, was in direct line of sight for a promotion into auditing. That's when he saw her. Merely a few yards past the door that Arthur was about to enter was the little girl he had saved from the suburbs and from being eaten by Murder Man. She was in coveralls that were a size too big for her, pushing along a cart carrying cleaning supplies that were taller than her. It was comical looking at the little one labored to move something that was never designed with her in mind. Almost. The fact of the matter was this: she was doing her job too well. Arthur and Rabia looked like the hell they had just been through and subsequently waged. The new commissioner wanted to see them immediately, with an appointment set a mere 10 minutes after they had arrived, which was so prompt that it was almost unheard of. Arthur's tie and shoe were missing, Rabia's shirt stained in the colonel's blood. Neither looked as professional as the words across Rabia's hat suggested. Arthur paused at the door. Protocol had kept him from warning the little girl before. He wanted desperately to tell her days ago that she should slack off, perpetually enjoy her position, and never stand out. She was only a table away then, but the social contract of the IRS was clear. Eat with your own kind and keep your head down. So he did nothing. He did nothing, and in the span of a week, the damage had been done. Arthur raised a hand to knock on the door, but froze in midair. Arthur McDowell had followed protocol to the letter his entire life, breaking it only recently to fraternize with Rabia. How important was keeping up with these bureaucratic standards, really? At the end of the day, wasn't what the IRS had been trying to accomplish since nuclear annihilation a Sisyphean task? Hadn't the very system he had been championing his entire life purposefully sent him to his death to cover for the throne-taking of the commissioner's office? Wasn't his warning worth being slightly late for? Arthur lowered his hand. She did not see him at first, her line of sight blocked by the cleaning cart that she was pushing. Arthur cleared his throat, and she either did not hear him or did not recognize the gesture. It was not until the cart had gently bumped into Arthur that she looked to see what had blocked its passage. The tiniest, faintest smile graced her face upon recognizing him. It was likely the most she had ever smiled. "Hello," she said meekly. "Can you move?" "No," said Arthur. "Not yet. There is something important I need to tell you." The little girl blinked in response. "You are doing a good job," he said. "Thank you," she replied with a smile. No, that just won't do. You are doing too good a job. Do you understand? No. Okay, so it's like this. People around here who do well, they get promoted, which means they get to do other jobs. But you don't want those other jobs. Those other jobs are scary and dangerous, and it means you will have to work outside. After hearing the word outside, the little girl's eyes widened in terror, but a lifetime of fear meant that she otherwise kept her composure. I did a great job wherever they put me, Arthur said. And you know what happened? They rewarded people who skated by, and my job always got worse. Only those evil enough to want power, or who are lazy enough to not care, excel in this environment. They need those like us to work hard so they have someone to take credit from. Don't get noticed, or they'll attach themselves to you. Do you understand? The little girl nodded. This will be the most important advice that you will ever get in an office job like this. And because this is the only office left on the planet, I need you to promise me that you will never try hard, Arthur pleaded. I promise, the little girl said. Good, said Arthur, relieved. The little girl moved past him now, at a greatly reduced speed. When she was past him, Arthur checked the time. He was 2 minutes late. That was some good advice, I guess, Rabia said, patting Arthur on the shoulder. Not sure I would approve if I hadn't seen this place with my own eyes. It's the advice I wish someone gave me after my dad died, but I didn't realize I felt half of what I said until a couple of days ago, he replied. The two agents, covered in grime, dirt, blood, and unwashed sex, opened the door to Boyd's office. They immediately stood out among the insane order and cleanliness within. All of Boyd's cabinets had been moved to this new, larger office, yet because it was twice the size of the old one, they had filled only half the room. The spaces they hadn't filled were measured out in a grid of blue painter's tape, each rectangle that they outlined signifying an exact space for another cabinet to be installed. Through habit and nervousness, Arthur made to straighten his tie, but when he was reminded it was no longer there, he awkwardly moved his hand up to his chin and rubbed his newly grown stubble. The grandfather clock-like face of Mr. Boyd looked more than sullen. It looked offended. There was a ruler in his hand to, as ever, regularly measure out the distance between his monitor and his coffee. The sight of the mug stirred anger inside of Arthur. The image of the red-haired agent decapitated and placed on a pike, who had failed to fill Boyd's cup quickly enough that day, hung in his mind like a terrible hangover. In the span of their last conversation, Henry S. Boyd had drunk 3 cups, more than Arthur could afford to have in a month. There was apparently never a shortage of coffee. Whatever they had rationed away was plenty to keep those high up, nice and happy. But this was no longer a prized status symbol to Arthur. It was a symbol of greed and abused power. It also probably had too much sugar in it. "You're late," Boyd barked. "I know," replied Arthur, "and I don't care." Rabia stood to the side, hands behind her back, but with a posture and demeanor too relaxed to be respectful. She smiled at Arthur's rebellion. Boyd looked at Arthur long and hard. He did not drink down half of his coffee, as he would have done without this offense, nor did he reprimand, because no one had ever been late and not apologized. He simply did not have the toolkit for this. After a pregnant moment of passive aggressiveness between the two men, and stifled giggles from Rabia, Boyd continued. "That, abomination you are wearing is a current and up-to-date bookkeeping ledger, I hear," he said, and then downed half of his coffee. "Yes, sir," Arthur said, with no love for the man he was speaking to. "Don't get me wrong, Mr. McDowell. Something like this is highly coveted," Boyd said. "We have not been able to go over the business records of any organization since the bombs dropped, because no one has kept any. With it, we can seize back taxes, and that is incredibly valuable. But it is not what you were sent out to get. Can I assume that you have your completed census forms?" "Mr. Boyd, This abomination doubles as my census efforts. I challenge any other agent to supply a census as thoroughly written as this, because the product being sold by the organization that I seized this from is people. It lists their race, age, gender, and even the location of their buyers. There is no better record of the population west of here, guaranteed, and it will allow us the opportunity to strengthen the government's current surplus once auditing and collection efforts begin. Arthur unbuckled the book from his back, releasing the smell of wet leather. He stepped toward the desk and dropped the tome with no regard for its weight or the sanctity of Boyd's anal measuring. It landed on the desk with a thunderous bass. Robbie's smile turned into a Cheshire cat snarl. Stunned at first, the commissioner turned the pages of the book slowly. His eyes grew wider with each page. "This is astounding," he said. He kept turning pages, revealing person after person and asset after asset. Horror did not grace Boyd's face as it had Arthur's when he read it. Alarmingly, his reactions suggested hunger rather than horror. "Incredible work," he whispered, then met the eyes of Arthur. "I suppose I can forgive lateness for something like this. You have gone above and beyond, like always." Boyd then said something that would have made Arthur's heart sing only days ago, but now filled him with murky contempt. "Good job." The commissioner raised his mug to kill the other half of coffee when his door suddenly opened. A woman, white shirt, black tie, and black skirt, marched into the office with a fresh mug of coffee, but froze mid-stride. Arthur's tardiness had interrupted the schedule of the coffee. She was on time, but without the other mug finished, had nothing to carry back. She set the mug on the desk without collecting the one in Boyd's hand. She then pivoted, walked to the door, signed that her job was complete, and then left. Boyd looked somehow wounded. Robbie cleared her throat in a way that was both vulgar and demanding. Boyd looked up at her, holding his half-empty mug impotently. "Ah, well, yes. A good job to you, too," he said. "You kept our man safe, and I am sure that your role in this was substantial." "I did 90% of the work, sir," she said in a half-muffled voice. Arthur did not protest. "Well, good," Boyd replied, still not sure if he should drink both and measure them, or drink one and measure, then drink the other and measure. This was more than enough to grant you a full-time contract and residence with the IRS. "Good work," he said in a near whisper, still deciding how to deal with his chaos. "Thank you for the promotion, sir," Rabia said. "Does this mean that I get the employee discount?" Boyd nodded his head. He then drank from the mug in his hand and picked up the new mug with his other, electing to just hold both of them. There was nothing left to be said. Well, at least not by Boyd. Arthur stayed where he was, relishing the wasted time that expired as he refused to leave. "Sir?" he said. "Oh, yes, that's right," Boyd stumbled. "You were promised a promotion. Well, I am sorry to say that it was filled while you were gone." "You gave it to Ralph Siemens," Arthur said. "Yes, that's right." "How did you know?" "DeWitt told me." Color drained from Boyd's face. He shuffled in his seat and cleared his throat. He sounded scared. Arthur did not think that Henry S. Boyd was capable of guilt. But fear? Oh, yes. Oh, yes, indeed. Before Boyd could say anything, the office door opened once more, and a man with a white shirt, black tie, and black slacks walked in with another mug of coffee. The same snap decision that the woman made was made by him, and he placed the new mug on Boyd's desk, leaving him with 3 mugs to juggle. Robbie and Arthur took this as an opportunity to leave. The agents angled towards the door, not wanting to be excused. Boyd was too busy dealing with his coffee nightmare and the knowledge that Arthur knew his predecessor's fate. The book they had delivered put things in motion that even Henry S. Boyd, with all of his newfound power, was helpless to stop. On paper, it was simple. The IRS was going to audit a business. The reality was far grimmer. The IRS was going to war. It would be the first one fought since the intercontinental ballistic missiles had their day out in the sun. What Boyd had said to Arthur when all of this began was true, but in a way that neither man could foresee. A new dawn for the IRS had broken. Rabia left the room, knowing her, eager for a cigarette, and presumably to check out her new accommodations. Arthur was happy for her. Much of what she had just earned he had taken for granted. She was a strong, self-made woman, and he was proud to know her. Arthur paused at the door, and then turned around. "Sir?" he said. The commissioner's eyes were still wide, puppy-like. His hands were full, not knowing how to solve his dilemma. He looked up at Arthur, and for the first time, he looked vulnerable. "Yes," he said. "It can be a secret, you know," Arthur said. "DeWitt asked me to do something, but I would have to go out of my way as it's not my department. I am still at heart a bureaucrat, so I probably won't do it, unless you give me a reason." The politics had changed. Boyd was unprepared for it. "Of course, I understand," he uttered with a nod, frantically looking from one coffee mug to the next. "When you mobilize our efforts to seize the Colonel's assets," Arthur said, "you put me on the front lines." About the author. M.P. Fitzgerald is an author and humorist dedicated to injecting the feverish gonzo style into fiction. You can get Memos from the Wasteland, which is the official prequel to this book, free. It contains hilariously bleak office drama, Rabia's diary, and Arthur's last letter from his father. To get your copy, just head over to his website at mpfitzgerald.art. You'll also get free updates on future audiobooks and more. We hope you have enjoyed A Happy Bureaucracy by M.P. Fitzgerald, narrated by Gary Bennett. Text copyright 2019 by M.P. Fitzgerald. Production copyright 2021 by M.P. Fitzgerald.
Music by Dust Mice. Available on all streaming services and dustmice.bandcamp.com.